You're listening to From the Horse's Mouth, intrepid conversations with Phil Fersht. Ready to meet the disruptors who are guiding us to the new great utopia by reshaping our world and pushing past corporate spin for honest conversations about the future impact of current and emerging technologies? Tune in now.
Well, it's a pleasure today to invite somebody onto this pod who I think I've known for 20, 25 years or so in and around the industry. And not a lot of people know that I started out covering a lot of HR technology and HR outsourcing and things. And one of the key voices at the time was a guy called Jason Averbook. This man has developed many startup companies and sold them off and built a real voice for himself as one of the eminent thought leaders in HR technology over the years. So maybe I'll hand over to you, Jason. And can you just explain a bit to our audience about your background and maybe a little bit about what are the key issues impacting HR today that is consuming your time?
Yeah, sure. So before I get too deep into the issues, as someone, Phil, as you said, have been spent 3 decades doing this. I started when I was 19, implementing payroll systems on DOS and mainframe platforms. All the way to, building one of the industry's first Windows applications for HR, joining PeopleSoft very early, and then moving on to really help organizations understand that technology alone is not going to transform them, but it's going to take a lot of other capabilities within that organization, mindset, skill set, and tool set. Today, when we work with HR organizations on a global basis, one of the things about my role at Mercer is leading our capabilities globally is that we have a lot of organizations that I like to say have collected the dots and not connected the dots.
Right.
So they've bought a lot of tech. They've implemented a lot of tech. They've used a lot of SIs to get this tech implemented. They've gone live. But at the end of the day, they're not seeing results. They don't have good data. And where we are from an AI standpoint, they're about to put a layer of frosting on top of a moldy cake. What that's about to realize is we've got all this money spent. We've done all of these things, yet we're not seeing the ROI and therefore the value of the investment of what we've done. So if I take that and combine it with HR issues, which are A, upskilling, reskilling, B, huge unlearning aspects needed when it comes to just how do we work and why are we here? And then the third thing is the pace of change and how do I keep up with the fact that I work in a profession that hasn't changed much for the last 30 years.
Right.
And all of a sudden I'm seeing things change by the 32nd. So I've worked for the last 5 years on putting in place DEI initiatives, and all of a sudden they're gone.
Right.
I'm trying to attract a workforce that that's going to stay for 18 months, and I'm used to keeping them for 18 years. All of those things together that I just mentioned is a massive pot of change.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, we only have to look at what's happened in the last 2 weeks to understand how much volatile change is going on in the world. But as we look back at the corporate landscape, it's been seismic. I mean, what would you pinpoint then as the number one pain points that are hurting enterprises right now when it comes to their workforce issues?
Phil, to me, it's agility. And I know that's an overused term, but because I've got so much technical debt, because I've got so much process anarchy and latency, I can't change fast enough. And, I can't change the workforce. I can't change my policies. I can't change my journeys to impact to the, I use this phrase with clients all the time. It's 2025 outside of work. What year does it feel like inside of work?
Yeah.
And just that, look in the mirror. It's 2025. How do I get stuff done outside of work? Ordering a pizza, ordering an Uber. How do I get stuff done inside of work? go into a transactional system, hit save, and have no idea what happens next. The chasm is so large, and I've got so much debt that I can't respond to the world that's going on outside of work fast enough, and therefore I fall into the world of irrelevance.
Yeah, and how much of this is exacerbated by remote working or hybrid working? Is this really making this very, very hard to manage? Or
So, Phil, I didn't even bring that up as to one of the trends because it's one of those things that is such another. I mean, if I add a couple trends onto the plate really quickly, that and the value of a college degree, that is also and then, oh, by the way, let's throw in skills. If I take those three added to everything we've just said, that's also on everyone's mind. So, for example, return to office. When I've got a group of 20-year-olds who are as lonely as they've ever been before. I happen to hear your great podcast with Scott Galloway, who I'm a huge fan of, who talks a lot about male loneliness. And loneliness is real. It's a real thing. And return to office, I think we overlook the fact that it can help with loneliness. I think we're like, hey, we've got this real estate and we've got to use it. I mean, I think that's a low-scoring game way to approach it versus thinking about the humanity that comes into play when I think about people working together and collaborating together. So, 2020 just accelerated all of this stuff. Phil, it got us collecting more dots. It got us saying we can do everything from home. And then all of a sudden, the societal and human impact of that, we're just starting to see today.
yeah, and I mean, I guess it's changing the whole concept of what is an employee versus what is a contractor. Like my company, we use some contractors who are fantastic. They behave like some of our best workers, and we have employees who, on the whole, are great performers, but occasionally you get some people who just think because they're an employee, they can redefine how they want to work with your organization, and it doesn't quite fit with where you're trying to go. So how do companies fix their cultures? Because this, to me, feels like the core of all the problems here is what is defining an organization today? What is the reason to exist as a employee within a company? And what can leaders do about this?
So Phil, I think that one of the biggest things that we do as leaders in organizations, and I talk about this quite a bit, is we focus on change management and not change leadership. And when I say that, that's not meant to be buzzwordy, but I see us creating these North Stars, these visions, these, there's so many phrases, employee value proposition, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is what we stand for. This is what we believe in, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'll get a little old school with you, Phil. We put it on a mouse pad, send it out to everyone so they can't forget it, or we print it on the back of their badge so they can't forget it. But then what do? We don't act like that in how we as leaders treat our people. So, a little example. Hey, guess what? I want to know all your skills, Phil, so that when you grow up, I can move you into a job that matches where you're trying to go. All of a sudden, a job opens up that matches where you're trying to go. And what do? I open a rec and bring someone in new instead of paying attention to you. That right there kills culture faster than almost anything in the world. Or, hey, Phil, go into the system of record and put in your skills. And like, oh, by the way, you're already doing that on LinkedIn, but do it for me also in my system. And then guess what? We'll think about you in the next succession plan. What do? I don't even pay any attention to that data. I look at it once a year. I don't personalize the employee experience tied to it. And people are like, why am I giving you this data? Like it's an HR thing. And by the way, no one trusts their HR department. So if you take all of that stuff together, it's the leaders of a business that are responsible for culture. It's the the higher management and middle management that are responsible for culture. And Phil, one of the things I'm a little bit worried about, actually I'm a little more than a little bit worried about, is I start to see, and this happened to me 3 weeks ago when The Guardian put out the latest press release that said Microsoft introduces AI employees. And, I had 3 CHROs email me that said, chief HR officers email me and basically said, where do I put these people on the org chart? And how do I get them to understand the values? And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, literally, what are you saying? Like, your AI employees, they made, first of all, they're not going to understand your employee. They're not part of your culture, but they're going to impact your culture if you don't talk to the workforce about how do I focus on what we think of as human-machine teaming. Because all of a sudden, your workforce is going to see them as threats. And what's the workforce going to do? We're not going to use them. I'm sorry, I talk about the employees, the agents as them in this particular case. But I think that the AI world is going to threaten culture even more. So your question is so valid. It has to be delivered in every single message. What do we stand for? What do we mean? And I'm going to show you it's more than just talk, but it's action.
That's right. And I mean, it was one thing 15, 20 years ago, talking to your employees about transitioning some of your work to people offshore or near shore or whatever. That's human to human. Asking your staff to rewrite parts of their jobs and transfer them into a piece of software, I mean, it's unheard of. And if you start talking about bots and agents as employees and humans, you're going to destroy your company very, very quickly. I mean, this is very much how do you build agentic systems where you had bots doing people's jobs for them, freeing them up to do more intelligent things without creating terrible insecurity, anxiety, and I don't know, almost like anger against the employer. I mean, I'm hearing about revenge quitting as the thought of the year right now for what's going on in many organizations.
Well, and Phil, that's why, when I was, part of the Davos event at the World Economic Forum, we talked a lot about this FOBO, fear of becoming obsolete. And I think that it's so important that I use the term educate, not train, that we educate people on the value that these tools can add if used. Now, notice what I did. Can add if used properly. Not that are guaranteed to add by just buying them from Microsoft or pick your vendor, putting it in and saying, guess what? Now we're done. So that concept of human-machine teaming is not just work design, it's also culture design. And it's making people feel comfortable that the purpose of these agentic systems, or let's not even get so technical in the way we say it, AI, is not to replace you, but to amplify you. And we're going to value you based on how you use these tools, not penalize you because, we're going to get rid of half the workforce. Now, really quickly, Phil, I think we're going to get rid of half the workforce. Like, I'm not Pollyanna like this and say, oh, yeah, it's just like spell check. We're not going to have any workforce reductions. Those people, once again, I'll go back to Galloway. He says it all the time. AI is not going to replace people. It's going to replace people that don't know how to use AI. I agree with that, but I also think that the organizations have a responsibility to say, how do I design work to leverage my people based on who I have and who I want in the best possible way?
Yeah, you're right. So as we look at the next wave of talent coming into companies, is this where the change occurs? Because, I mean, what we're hearing about Harvard MBAs are getting rehired at the lowest rate ever right now. I mean, you mentioned college degrees earlier, but are we producing people who are relevant for this corporate environment right now, or is there a growing disconnect that's happening?
I think that the disconnect is huge, Phil. I have 2 boys, they're 20 and 17, and I'm scared to death. I cannot tell you that my first piece of advice is you should go to college. Okay. I mean, I think you should go to college to learn how to learn. I think you should go to college to learn how to become an adult, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But from a knowledge standpoint, it is impossible. It is impossible. And by the way, I teach at 3 universities, and the tenured profs, they're teaching stuff that's irrelevant already. So, I mean, we have to think, it's a big, hairy statement, but we have to rethink education. We have to rethink education. Because, when you saw the latest study, I think it came out a couple weeks ago, that 35 to 40% of people would rather hire a robot than a college grad. I mean, when you start to say that, you're like, and it's not because they don't want people. It's not because they're trying to save money. It's because in this case, a robot, with a little bit of knowledge, knows more and is more ready to work than that college grad based on how the college grad is coming out. And Phil, when I do teach, last week, class I taught, every college grad that's looking for a job, people say AI is going to impact the workforce. AI has already impacted the workforce because these college grads aren't finding jobs. Do you see that? I'm curious. I mean, tell me your thoughts on that, because I hate to say this, but I think it's an elephant in the room that no one wants to see, that the fact that the elephant's in there.
What I'm seeing is companies right now, on the whole, are looking to do more with the people they've got and certainly not add more and more bodies into the mix. There's this sort of appetite to let's become more productive and scalable without adding oodles of additional people onto our needs, whether it's back office, front office. There's a big drop off in hiring of college grads. We're seeing that everywhere. And the other thing I'm seeing is certain people past mid-career levels coming onto the workforce. And this has been a trend for a year now, and I feel it's starting to accelerate, where people are very expensive. And companies are seriously questioning the ROI of people. And the onus is now really moving on to employees to prove their value to the company. So some people are going back into the office, getting their face in front of their bosses, trying to get more engaged to drive innovation. I'm seeing a lot of the under 30s going back to the office because they are lonely and they would rather get out of the house and meet other people. And we are starting to see, I think, distinct trends in how companies are operating and how people are starting to operate. But I do worry for a large sector of the workforce of people sitting at home, they sit behind a keyboard all day, they're getting angry, that they're not very engaged anymore with their companies. Travel is up more than ever in the United States, and it's people going on vacations. People are focusing much more on themselves, their own lives. I think work is taking a less important role in what they're doing in general. And this is why I think we're not just rethinking education. I think everyone's rethinking work. Like, what do we generally need? How do we move forward? There's a huge appetite, for example, to invest in India, like I've never seen. You've seen these global capability centers growing at 20% a year because you're buying talent in at a quarter of the cost, and they're motivated. They have a work ethic, and they're in an office, and they're working together. And there's some big trends happening with the workforce, and you're absolutely right. AI is already having its impact, and it's exacerbating every generation in many, many different ways. And how do we get ahead of it is the big challenge, big question.
Phil, one other thing I just want to throw out, and I wrote a blog or a Substack piece about this, on February 2nd, and it was about what I called retiring. I phrased it as there are people in the workforce that are ready to retire, and there's the need to retire the workforce. And I think that I think this is a massive discussion, because I'm running into 45 to 55-year-olds who are like, this isn't going to affect me. It's not going to affect how I work. It's fine. And then I'm running into another group of people who are and by the way, leaders in companies saying, we have to retire because guess what? We just got a foot of snow and the summer tires aren't going to work. we're going to have to put on the snow tires. And guess what? I have no one in the company that has snow tires. A lot of that is driven by AI, and a lot of that is driven by mindset. Are we thinking about transformation, or are we thinking about just kind of status quo? And I think that inertia, I think it's a blockbuster video. I hate to call out a company. I probably shouldn't have done that. But I think it's a blockbuster video moment where we're going to watch. I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to watch more companies go out of business or sell off whatever they can and take the people into companies with the right mindsets. They're not going to sell off their hard asset. They're going to sell off their brains and move those brains into organizations that have cultures and that do have the right mindset to think about how to balance human-machine teaming.
Yeah. You're absolutely spot on, Jason. I think the change is underway. Companies who want to survive are getting smarter about their workforce. As a manager of a company of 75 people, we spend more time than ever dealing with people issues. And a lot of it's exacerbated by technology, remoteness, loneliness, motivation, these types of things. And there's always a point where it's like, who is adding value, who's adding the right attitude, and who is not. And so much of it's down to attitude now, Jason. It's like, who do you want to work with? Like, you want people around you who are collaborative, who aren't just working in this little silo, who actually want to work with you on what's changing in the world, who are doing boot camps to show how we're using tools like AI tools to be more effective in our jobs. We're in the research business, so we've got all sorts of cool shit that we can use to get access to data better, produce charts better, summarize and distill insight, all types of things. But the collaboration is so important. And what I worry about is exactly what Scott Galloway said: loneliness, people hiding behind a keyboard and a screen all day. Like, when does the manager become like a mentor for someone's mental health? But that's literally what's happening. It's like, how do you get people in the right mindset? So
yeah, and I hate to say, I from a leadership standpoint, and not to go too deep into this, Phil, I use 3 words: team, trust, and passion. Always, my whole career, I've used these things. We are a team. The minute you're not on the team, you don't belong here. Trust. We have to trust each other. The minute there's trust broken, you shouldn't be here, and then passion, the grit and the passion is so important, because there's no way that I, as an organization of 85,000 people now, am ever going to teach people fast enough, all 85,000, the ability to pivot the way they need to. Impossible. So if the passion's not there to be able to learn on your own, okay? And if I'm not, and as a company, if I'm not giving the right fence or the right playpen in order to help me learn on my own, like, I have a problem, and that problem is the speed in which I laugh, Phil, that everything moves so fast, yet we're like, oh, well, we're not going to see the results of any of that stuff at work for 10, 15, 20 years. Anyone that thinks that is smoking something bad, because it's not going to work. Like, we are very, very close to a point where that transformation moment is going to set in, and it's going to be either really good or it's going to be really ugly. And you can take geopolitical things into account tied to this as well. When you start to add all of these variables together, like, we are at a, powder keg moment here, where you either are on board or you should get off board.
Yeah, powder keg moment. You're absolutely right. And I've always viewed economic recessions as times for real change. We haven't had one of those since 2008, really. And one suspects, with everything going on in the world right now, we could hit some global economic event in the next few months or a couple of years. And that will really change how companies operate. I think if you get some major economic force, companies are ready to make big changes. And it might take something like that to drive some more severe changes in the organizations that I worry about. So.
Phil, I think that, one of the things I actually think that it may not be an economic depression, but it might be a humanistic depression. And I think that the humanistic depression is tied to change. I think the humanistic depression is tied to technology.
Yeah.
I think the humanistic depression takes into account financial depression, but I don't think recession. But I don't think we just look for, I get really frustrated when the financial analysts say we're in a recession. Yes or no? We've been waiting for a few years for a recession, and one could argue whether we hit that point. I think that we are in a humanistic recession where people are scared for their jobs. They're scared around politics. They're scared about what's going to happen with technology, and they're scared both upside about their parents, God bless if we still have them, and downside about their kids and what their kids are going to do. And if we don't take that all into account when we think about this human at the center approach for work, I think we're leaving a lot on the table.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic way to look at it. When we talked about HR 20 years ago, you probably remember a famous article. What was it? HR is Dead, a Fast Company article. That had a lot of impact on the industry at the time. I think there was a lot of outsourcing going on in HR. Just to sort of sum up our conversation, how has HR changed, and how healthy would you say the HR function is in organizations today as a result?
Phil, I and we break it down into three camps. The first camp is the HR function, which is a function that's really good at counting heads. The second camp is an HR function that's really good at making heads count. And the third camp, and it's a new camp, is really good at thinking about what the workforce of the future looks like, which is the concept of human-machine teaming. So counting heads, making heads count, and then thinking about work design, which is human-machine teaming.
Yeah.
Most organizations, from a health standpoint, are beyond the head count stage and in the early innings of making heads count. Okay. Now you have to do all three, by the way. This isn't like a sequential thing. So when I say that, I think we're in the late innings of being able to get a head count report. Thank God, Phil, that I might know how many people I have compared to how many laptops I have. Second, making people count. I think we're in the early innings, unfortunately. What skills do people have? How do I leverage them? How do I drive productivity, et cetera, et cetera? And then this new camp, which is human-machine teaming, I think it's like the game hasn't started yet. So from an HR agenda standpoint, I think we've got massive opportunity. And back to the we hate HR or is HR dead? I can tell you at least with the last one, human-machine teaming, and the am I making people count? If HR doesn't do it, the business is going to have to do it, or the business goes out of business.
Exactly. Well, on that note, I think we can walk away and think a bit more deeply about human-machine teaming and the fear of becoming obsolete, Jason. This has been a phenomenal conversation. It's been great catching up with you after all these years.
And Phil, I just have to say, and I'm not blowing smoke, you do amazing work in the space. Love what you guys do. Love how you keep the whole industry on its transformation edge of the seat. And the one thing whenever I think about your firm, I call it relevance. And I think that's the most important thing that any of us as humans or firms can be, in 2025. So thanks for having me.
Well, that's great. That's great. I'll take relevant. Relevant is a great compliment. I appreciate it, and look forward to the next time. Thank you, Jason.
Sounds good. Thanks, Phil.
Cheers.
Thanks for tuning in to From the Horse's Mouth, Intrepid Conversations with Phil Fersht. Remember to follow Phil on LinkedIn and subscribe and like on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favourite platform for no-nonsense takes on the intricate dance between technology, business, and ideological systems. Got something to add to the discussion? Let's have it. Drop us a line at fromthehorse'smouth@hfsresearch.com or connect with Phil on LinkedIn.